Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. Today I'm really excited because I'm going to be showing you guys how to make this super cute bee. These work up pretty quickly and they're so cute, and I absolutely love making them for markets. And as you may or may not know, bees do sell really well at markets, and while they're a popular product like for every crocheter pretty much that does plushies, I still find that they sell really well for me. So I wanted to show you guys how to make a bee today. This is just my version of how to make a bee. I know a lot of people have bee patterns, but this is my way, so I hope you enjoy it. And this bee is a part of my 10 weeks of market tutorials. So this is week 3, and we also have made a turtle and a scrunchie so far, and they turned out so cute. So stay tuned for more of the 10 weeks coming soon. But now let's just get into the materials you'll be needing to make this guy. I'm gonna start out with the yarns, and you're gonna need a few different yarns, and then I'm just gonna take them out of the frame because they're really big. But the first color you're gonna need is yellow, or whatever color you want as your base color. I'm gonna be using this pale yellow baby blanket from Bernat, and then you're gonna need a second color for the stripes, so I'm gonna be using this black. This is just regular Bernat blanket yarn. And then for the details of the bee, I'm going to be using white Bernat blanket, or this is probably Mainstays, like the Walmart brand blanket yarn actually, for the wings. And then for the other details, I have a little bit of this Bernat blanket pink yarn for the blush, which is optional, but I think it's really cute. And then also optional is some white acrylic, which you can use to make the eyes look super cute. So that's completely optional as well, but if you want to add some white to the eyes, you can include that. Now getting into materials, I'm going to be using a 8mm hook because I'm using the like super bulky weight 6 yarn, so I do like to use an 8mm. You can also use a 6, but the bee will turn out smaller, just so you guys know. You'll also be needing a stitch marker to keep track of the stitches, and then I'm also going to be using some scissors and a tapestry needle for like weaving in the ends and sewing on the wings. And then you'll also be needing some stuffing. I'm just going to use polyfill, but I'm not going to put it on the screen because it's too big. You will also be needing safety eyes to add eyes to our bee. I'm going to be using 16mm in this bee, but I did use 12 in this one, so it's just personal preference, and I'm just trying out the 16s just to see how it's going to look for my bees. So you can either use 12s or 16s depending on how big you want them to be. Now that we have all of our materials, I'm going to get into how to make the bee. And we're going to start out with the wings, and you do actually want to start with the wings because we're going to be attaching them while we're still making the bee, and it just makes it way easier, so just make the wings first. Okay, so I grabbed my wing color. I'm going to be using white. And before we start out with anything, I'm just going to say, like I usually do, that my tutorials are usually pretty beginner friendly, but they're not like meant to teach you how to crochet. So if you don't know how to crochet at all, you never crocheted before, and you don't know like the stitches I'm going to be saying or anything, then you might want to go watch like a how to crochet tutorial first so that you can learn the stitches and stuff. But if you are just like a beginner but you have a little bit of experience with like the stitches and how to literally hold your hook or anything like that, then you should be good. With that being said though, I'll probably do like some slow stitches, but I'm not going to be going like super in-depth on how to do the stitches just because this tutorial is like a little more in-depth. So I am just going to get started now. To get started, we are going to be making 2 wings. So I'm going to show you how to make one, and then you're going to want to go make another one, and we'll have 2 total before we begin the bee. So to start out the first wing, we are just going to make a magic ring. And when you make the magic ring, you want to leave a little bit of a tail. So just like leave some yarn out of the ring. You don't need it to be huge or anything, but we're going to use it to kind of attach to the bee. So you just want to leave a little bit of a longer tail than you maybe usually would. And if you find magic rings difficult or you don't like to do them, you could also do a chain 2 for the beginning of this, and then just work into the first chain. And to start the wings, we're actually going to be doing half double crochets. So for the rest of the bee, we're going to be doing singles, but for the wings, I like to do half doubles just because you can do less rows because they're a little bit taller stitches. So I'm going to start by doing 1 half double into the ring. So yarn over, go into the ring, pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through all 3 of the loops. And then I'm going to repeat this for a total of 6 half double crochets in the magic ring. And that is going to be round 1 of our wing, so just make 6 half doubles into the ring. And once you have 6, I'm just going to close the ring up a little bit, but I'm not going to secure it yet. And then I'm going to start out on round 2, which is the final round. And so we're just going to start by yarning over and inserting into our very first stitch, and then we're going to make a half double. And then I am going to add in my stitch marker just to keep track of that first stitch. And then in the next half double stitch, we are going to be putting 2 half doubles, so an increase. So start out by making 1 half double. And then just make 1 more into that very same stitch. So we are going to be repeating 1 half double in the first stitch and then an increase in the next stitch all the way around. It's a total of 3 times, so we will have a new total stitch count of 9 half double crochets around with those 3 new increases. So that is what we will be doing for round 2. So this is how our wing is now looking, so I'm just going to remove the stitch marker. And to finish off the wing, I'm just going to be putting a slip stitch into the first stitch that we made. So inserting into that very first stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then just pull right through that last loop. Now that we have our wing, we are going to just chain and tie off, and we're going to leave a little bit of a tail for attaching, but it doesn't need to be super long. I'm going to cut this off. And one thing I do like to do is I just like to make sure that magic ring is nice and tight, and I do like to add a couple of knots into the ring just because I like it to be extra secure. And then the last thing we're going to do on the wing before we begin our second wing is we're just going to use our tapestry needle, and we're going to work into just the back of the stitches that we made, and we're working towards this end that we just made. And I like to do this before I attach the yarn, but you can also attach this middle yarn if you want to. And just make sure when you do this that you can't see the needle on this side at all. And then I'm just going to attach the yarn, and you want to just pull this center yarn through to the side so that when we attach the wing, we can be using these strings to attach it. So now that we have our wing all ready to go, we are going to make 1 more wing, and I'm just going to go do this off camera, so you can skip back the tutorial if you want to remember how to do it, or if you do not remember how to do it, just go ahead and do that now. And then once you have 2 wings, we're going to begin with our yellow yarn, so I'm going to go grab that, and I will meet you guys back once we're ready. I now have my 2 wings all complete, so I'm going to move on to doing the start of our bee. So we're going to have our yellow yarn, and we are going to start by making a magic ring. And I'm now going to be doing single crochets instead of half doubles to work up our bee. So I'm going to start with 1 single crochet into the ring. So insert your hook right into that ring, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through both of the loops. And we're going to be repeating that a total of 6 times around our ring for round 1 of our bee. And then I'm just going to tighten up the ring a little bit, but I'm not gonna tie knots in it or anything yet. And then moving on to round 2 of our project, we are just going to start by working into that very first single. So insert your hook into that first single, and we're just going to be making 1 single. And then we're going to grab our stitch marker and insert into that very first stitch. And then we are going to be putting 1 more single into that stitch to make our first increase. So just put 1 more single into that very same stitch. And that is what we are going to repeat all the way around. So put 2 single crochets in all 6 of the singles from round 1, so that we have a total of 12 single crochets in round 2 when it's all complete. And once we have finished all 12 of our singles, we are going to remove the stitch marker. And for round 3, we're going to start by putting one single into that very first stitch. And I'm just going to reattach that stitch marker into that very first stitch. And then in the next stitch, we are going to be putting 2 single crochets. So we're going to be making a increase. You guys can also, like, if you're gonna tie knots or tighten up your ring fully, you can do that now. I'm just gonna do it now. I do it whenever, but the reason I don't like fully attach it at the very beginning is because sometimes I need to kind of expand it a little bit just to make it easier for those first few like smaller rounds. But now it is all secured, and I'm going to be continuing round 3 with 1 single crochet and an increase all the way around, and this will leave us with a total of 18 single crochets in round 3. Okay, and I just finished my 18 single crochets, so now we're going to be moving on to round 4. So I'm just going to remove the stitch marker, and I'm going to start out round 4 by putting 1 single crochet into that very next stitch. And I'm just going to add the stitch marker back, and we are just going to continue putting 1 single crochet all the way around for this round. And we are also going to be doing the exact same thing in round 5. So we're going to work around putting 1 single crochet in every stitch for a total of 18 stitches in rounds 4 and 5, but just hang on for a minute before you go and skip ahead or anything, because I do like to end off these rows a little bit differently, because I like to have a seamless like color change and bottom of my bee, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So I'm just going to work around for 18 single crochets in round 4. And when I get to the end, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do to make this row start being a little more even rather than like a swirl. So I'm just going to get to the end. And now that I'm at the end, I'm going to remove the stitch marker, and I'm going to put a slip stitch into the very next stitch. So I'm just going to do a slip stitch. And then when I do my next single, I'm going to be working into this second stitch. So I'm not going to be working right back into this stitch. I'm going to be working into the second stitch, and then at the end of the row, I am going to be putting a single crochet into this slip stitch. So the slip stitch is going to act as a stitch in this round and in the next round and in all the following rounds, just because I don't want there to be a hole. If I was to not work into the slip stitch, there would be a little bit of a hole. So I am going to not chain, I'm just going to work right into that second stitch with a single crochet. And that is where I'm going to put my stitch marker. And then I'm just going to continue around round 5, like I said, doing the exact same thing as the round 4, so just 1 single crochet all the way around in each stitch for a total of 18 single crochets. But since we started in that second stitch of the round, we are going to finish the final single crochet in that slip stitch so that we have a total of 18 and so that there's no hole or gap. And now that I've finished that 5th round, I'm going to remove the stitch marker, and I'm going to place a slip stitch into that first stitch we made. And then I'm just going to now tie off the yarn. And I do like to tie off instead of like leaving it attached. I guess you could leave it attached if you want to, but this is just how I think it looks the best. So I'm just going to tie off that yarn and leave a short tail just to secure it inside. And I'm now going to grab my black yarn. And when I attach yarn, I do like to put a slip knot into the yarn just because I find it easier, but you don't have to do that if you don't want to. And I'm going to be attaching my yarn into the stitch that we put our slip stitch into, so I'm just going to put my hook underneath that slip stitch, and then I'm going to reattach the slip knot from the black and pull that through, and then I'm just going to be working into that very next stitch for round 6. And what I like to do, like probably during or after this round, is just tie these two ends together inside just to secure them. But now that we have our black sort of attached, I'm going to work round 6. So for round 6, we're just going to work all the way around for 18 total stitches, but at the end we are going to be doing a slip stitch, and this is our technically the second stitch of the round. At this point it's not really the second stitch, but you guys know what I mean. Just work into that space with a single crochet and then continue doing that all the way around until you get to the very end. And when you get to the end, you're going to make a slip stitch. And then you'll also be tying off the yarn and reattaching our yellow. I've got to the final stitch, so I'm now just going to put a slip stitch into that very first single crochet we made. And I'm going to tie off the black now. And again, technically you could just leave that loop and then do the yellow and then insert your hook back into that loop for the next round, but I prefer to do it this way. And like I said before, I'm now just going to attach these strings together inside. So just these two, yellow and black, I'm just going to attach with a couple of knots just to secure them and tuck those inside. And then I'm going to grab back my yellow yarn and start out on that row. So I'm just going to do a slip knot like I normally do. Then I'm going to attach my yarn into that last stitch we worked into. And for round 7 of our project, we are just going to work into that very next stitch with a single crochet and continue doing that all the way around for a total of 18 stitches around. And you'll notice I'm not putting my stitch marker in just because we are color changing, so it's pretty easy for me to tell when I'm done the row, but if you feel like a stitch marker would make it easier for you, definitely continue adding that. Now that I'm back, I'm going to just put a slip stitch into that first stitch we made, and I'm going to tie off the yarn. And then I'm just going to tie these two ends together, just like I did before, just to secure them. And I'm just going to tuck them in, and then I'm going to grab back my black just for our last round of black for round 8. I'm going to do a slip knot like I normally do. And I'm just going to insert my hook into the space we slip stitched into and then reattach the yarn. And now that we have our yarn attached, I'm going to just be repeating one single crochet all the way around for a total of 18. But when we get to the end, we're going to be doing our slip stitch. And we're going to be color changing back to yellow for round 9 and the remainder of the project. So once this round is over, you can put away your black yarn because we won't be needing it again. Okay, and I just finished my last stitch, so I'm going to put a slip stitch into that first single we made, and I'm just going to tie off the yarn. And I'm just going to tie the last two ends we used. And then this last black one I'll just attach to the yellow that we're going to reattach. Before I go ahead and reattach my yellow though, I am going to work on the face details and attach the wings. So I'm going to grab my safety eyes, and once you have your eyes, you're just going to line it up. Even though we have a pretty seamless join here, I'm going to still put the color changing at the bottom. So just kind of put your color changing at the bottom and then hold up your bee how you want it to be facing head on. And then we're going to be attaching our eyes in rounds 3 and 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we're going to be doing them around 7 stitches apart. I always just like to add the first eye first, like wherever I want, and then I'm going to kind of count out 7 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and just put the other eye right there. And once our eyes are pretty much where we want them to be, I'm just going to add on the backs. And then I'm just going to do the blush before I do the eye detail. I actually did the eye detail at the end last time, but I'm going to do it now. So I'm going to start with the blush though. So to do the blush, we're just going to grab a short piece of yarn, and I use the same piece for both blush sides. So I just grab a strand of pink, and I'm going to attach it to my needle. And then we're going to be putting the blush right down the center of the eye, about 1 stitch down. So right between rounds 3 and 4, we're just going to be inserting our hook about 1 stitch down from the eye. So it's like pretty much directly in the center of the eye. And then we're going to pull the yarn almost all the way through, but not all the way through. And then I'm just going to go across 1 total stitch. So from between rounds 3 and 4 to between rounds 4 and 5, directly across, and just inserting that needle back in and pulling it through. So that is our first little blush, and I do just like to make one more going into those very same places just to kind of make it a little thicker. And that is our first blush. So now I'm just going to move over to the other side, and in that exact same spot on the other side, I'm just going to pull the needle out. And you don't want to pull too tight because you see how the pink strand is going across, so you can even pull it out just a little bit to loosen it up. And then going 1 stitch across, I'm going to insert the needle. And there is our first piece of blush, and then I'm just going to repeat that. And our blush is now complete, so I'm going to turn our bee inside out for a minute, and I'm going to go ahead and tie these 2 strings together. If you don't have enough to tie them together, you can also just tie them to one of the loose ends in here. You just want them to be secured within the project. And you'll see I'm not pulling that first knot too tightly because you just don't want it to be too tight. Then the second knot I'll pull nice and tight. And there's our blush. So cute. And I'm just going to do the eye detailing. Again, this is optional, but I think it's so cute. So I'm just going to grab a strand of white. And this is our white acrylic. It's weight 4, just acrylic yarn. And to make the white on the eye, I like to start by going into pretty much the center / the outer side at the top of the eye, and you want to get as close to the actual safety eye as you can, and then pull it almost all the way through, and then just going to about that part of the bottom, so just around to about here, and inserting as close to the safety eye as we can. And then I'm just going to pull it through. And you'll want to pull that nice and tight, and then if you'd like, you can repeat it one more time. And you can see it just adds a little bit of white to the side of the eye. So I'm now just going to move across to the other eye and repeat this exact same thing. And then you just want to make sure they look even on both sides and just kind of pull it. And then you are done with the eyes. So I'm just going to turn it inside out again, and I'm going to secure the 2 ends together. So we're now done the face detailing. So now we're going to grab our wings, and we're going to be attaching our wings. Well, it's not stuffed or finished yet. I find that that is easier. So just start with 1 wing and attach your yarn to one of the strands of yarn on it. I usually do the one from the slip stitch or like the tying off rather than the magic ring, but it doesn't really matter. And you'll just want to line up your bee so that you're looking at it from the very center, and you'll just kind of want to go up from the center, and we're going to be attaching it in the yellow row, so round 7 I believe. And again, just go down the very center and make sure that we find that center stitch. So I'm going to be inserting my needle directly into that stitch right beside the center one, and just pulling that yarn through it to the inside of the project. And then I'm just going to be repeating with the second one. And then it's pretty much personal preference how much you decide to attach the wings. I don't really attach them that much more than this. I might just grab one of my strands of yarn and go through the wing one time just to secure it into place. I'm just going to go into that wing and then just right back down through it. And then before I secure those ends together, I'm just going to attach the other wing. So again, just look at it from head on and then into that stitch beside the center stitch on the yellow row. Just insert right in there and pull that strand through to the inside, and then repeat that with the other strand. And you just want to make sure that they're even, and then you can finish off securing them on. So I'm just going to do one more stitch into that next wing, just because that's what I did to the other one. So just position it how you want. Go right up into it. And then right back down through that stitch. And then now that they're nice and secure, I'm going to just tie these white strands in a few knots together. And you want to make sure that they're not going through the exact part of the same stitch, or else you could literally just pull them right out. So just make sure that they're like in slightly different parts of the stitch, just so we don't have that issue. I'm just tying a few knots in each one. And then I'm just going to tuck all of those loose strands right into the bee. And then as you can see, our wings are nicely secured on and we have our face done. So now we're going to finish up our bee. So for round 9 of the bee, we're going to be grabbing back our yellow yarn and we're going to do a slip knot. And then going into the last stitch we worked into, that slip stitch space, but it's the actual stitch, and just attaching the yarn. Then going into that second stitch of the row, we are going to be making one single crochet, and we will be repeating that all the way around for a total of 18 stitches in round 9. And this is the last round that we're going to be doing the just 18 stitches around. So in round 10 we'll be starting the decreases, but for round 9 just do one round for a total of 18 in the row. And at the end of this round, I'm not going to be slip stitching because, I don't know, you guys can do the slip stitching throughout if you would like to, like even at the very beginning, but I've tried it and I just prefer to do it as least as possible, just for that nice color change effect. But aside from that, I don't really like to do it. So I am just going to work into that next stitch when we begin the row, just like normal. So for round 10, we are going to be putting one single crochet to begin into that very first stitch. And then I am going to add my stitch marker this time just because we're using the same color for this whole row. And I am just going to secure those last two ends before I continue. And then once we have that, I'm going to work into the second stitch and the third stitch by doing a decrease. So I'm going to be doing an invisible decrease. So to do that, we're going to work into the front loop only. Instead of working into the whole entire V, we're going to just do that front loop. And we're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. And then working into that next stitch, the front loop only, yarn over and pull up another loop. And then to finish the decrease, we're just going to yarn over and pull through all three. And that is our invisible decrease stitch. So in the next stitch, we're just going to be doing a regular single crochet. And then in the next stitch, we're going to be doing a decrease. So just work into those front loops of the next two stitches and then make a decrease. And that is the pattern we're going to be repeating all the way around. So one single crochet and then a invisible decrease for a total of 12 stitches in this round. And before we go ahead and do the 11th and final round, I am going to grab my stuffing and put a little bit of stuffing into our bee. So once we have our stuffing in there, you can always add more at the end. I just like to stuff it a good amount in this row. I am going to start the final round. So to do that, I'm just going to remove the stitch marker. Then in the first stitch of the round, we're going to be putting a invisible decrease. And then I'm just going to add the stitch marker back. That is what we're going to repeat all the way around. So in every single stitch, we're going to be doing an invisible decrease. And that will leave us with a total of 6 single crochets in round 11, the final round of our bee. And once we are done that, we're just going to stuff if we need to add any more stuffing. And then we're going to close it up. Okay, and so I'm now going to tie off the yarn and just leave a short tail for sewing and just cut off and pull that in tight. And then I'm going to remove the stitch marker and I'm going to stuff it just a little bit more. And then I'm just going to add on my tapestry needle and I'm going to work in the front loops of every stitch and just pull the needle through those last 6 stitches that we just made, and I'm going to then pull the yarn to close it up. And then I'm going to secure this with just a couple of knots. So just working into the project and tying a few knots. Then I'm just going to weave this end all the way through. So I'm just going to kind of push the needle through the project and pull the yarn to the center. Then with the remaining yarn, I'm just going to tuck it in a little bit and then just cut off any excess if you want to. And now we have our finished bee all complete. It's so cute and little. I absolutely love it. And these are the 2 bees together, so you can see they have different size eyes and they're slightly different colors, but they're both so cute. So whatever yarn you use to make this and whatever eye size should look really great, and I absolutely love the outcome of these. Let me know if you tried out the tutorial and if you enjoyed it and what color of bee you made. Stay tuned for more 10 weeks of market tutorials coming very soon. And if you haven't already, make sure to check out the other tutorials that we have posted since starting the 10 weeks of tutorials. We made a super cute turtle and a velvet scrunchie, so make sure to check them out if you haven't already. And don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe to see more videos like this one. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!